My guest today is Richard Parris. Richard is the co-founder at Saito, a self-sufficient layer one blockchain that is designed to scale. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks, Annie. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here, Richard. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It'd be cool if you could please introduce yourself. Love to hear some of your, personal and professional backstory. You know, what you've been
hmm
doing that led you to, where we are today with co-founding Saito.
Cool. I'm probably the right place to start with me is I was always a Linux and open source guy. And I got into that, kind of through my studies and quite early on. I remember seeing a very early Linux PC and getting excited, in the 90s. And when I was working later in Beijing, and I heard about these guys talking about a kind of free and open source network. And that's how I first heard about Bitcoin. And I started going into sort of attending Bitcoin meetings and talking to people about Bitcoin, and hearing about it on like Linux and open source podcasts very early on, and not really knowing much about what it was, but then going and finding out and seeing things like Crypto Graffiti app and stuff in the really, really early days of Bitcoin, so 2012, 13, where people, were just using it to send a couple of pixels in a message and that sort of thing. And this, particularly living in China at the time, was really appealing because I'd seen the original open internet, kind of as a student form, and I was very excited about this idea of like, oh, look, we can all connect to each other, we can all share ideas and things. But we were seeing the start of like, the kind of FANG takeover in the West. And then moving China, you could see kind of government supported FANG, the Chinese version, doing the same thing on the Chinese side. So all sorts of things, from direct control over the internet through to companies moving more and more to apps that were walled gardens and removing. Twitter, when it started, had this beautiful open API. It was a playground, and pretty quickly it shut down to be like, no, 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 you have to come to us, and we own your content, we own you once you're on the platform. So, Bitcoin, to me initially, I was like, wow, this thing, it's an ownerless network. So you can't impose control that way. You can't control the users. And that was the original kind of sense I had, is that it was something um, very much like in line with those open source, free as in freedom, not as in beer kind of ethos that I was really into. And then I got to see some of the other implications as well around money and so forth. And kind of back in 2014, 15, I'd go to Bitcoin meetup in Beijing, and there'd be someone from Silicon Valley there, and they'd ask you, like 200 people in the room, and they'd ask you, does anyone here, actually have a job working in Bitcoin? So 80% of the room. And they were stunned because Beijing took off so fast, and three of the world's biggest exchanges were there. Yeah, crazy environment. Uh, and so we got to kind of see that take off and that become the dominant narrative of Bitcoin as money, which I think is kind of not surprising. And then, of course, the block size wars and this internecine fighting. These guys we'd known well, some guys who worked at Bitmain on kind of building miners, and we'd played poker with them and guys from OKCoin who we're all working on exchanges and that sort of thing. And then 6 months later, they're throwing rocks at each other from trenches over Bitcoin scaling, right? And over like how are we going to move forward? It's starting to get popular. Blocks are getting full, transaction fees are going up, all the sort of things we know from the long narrative of crypto, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or other POS and DPoS systems. To this day, we have these questions. How do we deal with that? And Saito was really born out of that. It was really born out of an old WeChat group where we were lucky enough to be invited by a guy called Jake Smith, who was an early Bitcoin evangelist in Beijing and worked for some of the exchanges and the really early movers in Bitcoin, set up a WeChat group. And that group was nuts. It had Vitalik in it. It had Charlie Shrem in it. It had the founders of all the big exchanges. And it was just sort of like a local group we're in, but it was very informed. Adam Back was in there for a while. It was those sorts of people, really fundamental early thinkers. And that was really the starting place for Saito, where we started looking at these debates. And David, my co-founder, was looking and saying, I think everybody's wrong. I think the problem isn't technical. The problem is with the design. And, that's the kind of impetus behind behind Saito. And then a couple of years later, David had time away from his business to work on something and started asking me questions about design. And a couple of years later, we were both working full time on Saito as our main interest in life. So
Fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah, I like it. That's yeah, very good origin story, I suppose,
yeah.
Richard. So maybe then at this point, it's probably a good idea just to explain a little bit of, I guess the vision statement or high level summary, however you
Mhm.
want to characterize it, of what you guys are trying to do with
Yeah.
Saito, the kind of I don't know, use cases or users that you're looking to target. It looks like it's a Web3, which may
Mhm.
not surprise people, but yeah, go for it.
It's OG Web3. It's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So I mean, basically, if like I mentioned early on in the kind of ramble I just went on, that um, one of the first things that appealed to me was this network aspect of Bitcoin. You had a bulletproof network that couldn't be censored and wasn't owned and had no ability for people to rent seek. And with scaling, that went away. I mean, I could send you a message. Technically, I can send a message on the Bitcoin blockchain, but by the time I get to, dear Andy, hope you're doing well, I've just spent $48 or $400 getting that much information onto the Bitcoin blockchain. It's obviously not set up. I'm not getting into design, but it's not set up to enable that. And definitely the way it's run now, it's not a thing you can do. David and I, for slightly different reasons, but both influenced, I think, by living in Beijing and seeing the imposing forces on controlling networks, wanted to build something that had those properties but worked as a data network. So not just cheap transaction fees and quick, and quick confirmation, but something that could really handle application data. And so that required something different. And so our purpose was, and still is, to build genuine peer-to-peer applications with the blockchain performing the role of a public PKI network. So the blockchain's primary purpose in Saito is to allow people and give people all the tools they need to operate independently on a network. So they don't have to hand over their identity to a provider, and that they can't get rents, can't be subject to rent seeking or get locked in because they have to use someone's API. Applications contact each other directly. Everyone's a peer. So even if you're operating with a service, you and that service have the same rights and abilities on the network. So no one can hoard your data or control your identity in any way that you don't allow them to. And so that's why if you look at Saito.io, we have a suite of applications that demonstrate how that works, but they've also built out the building blocks for anyone who wants to build those kind of bulletproof peer-to-peer applications where users are, sort of sovereign and free to operate as they want. And that's really the vision and mission statement for Saito, is to build infrastructure that funds itself, that can stay independent and can enable people to work with full rights and control over whatever they're doing on a network. And the cool thing is we don't know specifically how people will use it. We're not setting out to tell people it's for this, it's for gaming, or it's for secret transmissions or whatever. We're just saying it's a toolkit. Build an internet that's better using this. And that's getting it's a bit of a movement that way, and it's getting traction, and it's quite exciting to work on.
Yeah, very nice. And look, Richard, when you talk about those applications, are you talking about like you have there's a kind of little ecosystem that's pretty cool around Saito with there's arcade, there's a chat room, there's a talk thing to make calls. There's
Yeah,
Saito Red Square, which is it's like a social network, right?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, we set out to, in some ways, there's a couple of purposes behind building that. One is to demonstrate what you can do with a PKI network. And sometimes that takes people a bit to grok, right? So you come onto Red Square, you can start posting, you can see your key. And after a while, people realize, wait, when did I sign in? How is all of this working? And then they can go and see, oh, I've got a key pair that was created for me in the browser. I can back it up. I can restore it later. But you never had to say, here's my username and password. Now you're going to take over my identity and manage it for me. You just, you walk in and you're an equal player with everybody else. And people, I think once they see that, they get this sense of why it's exciting. So part of the reason is to demonstrate that to people. Look how applications could be. We're so used to being confronted by this wall at the front of the internet, and you don't have to have it. Part of it is then to also show developers underneath, this is how you can feasibly build something like that without the Twitter infrastructure. The whole industry is based around this idea that you have a cool idea, you go to some VCs, you say, give me ungodly amounts of money so I can build data centers, fill them with user data, then lock that off and monetize it so I can get you your money back and become a billionaire myself. And that's the profitable way. And if users get a cool service out of that for a while, great. If they don't, that's not what that engine is set up to do. It's set up to make the people who run it richer. With Saito, we're also trying to show people, look, there is another way. It's a bit DIY because you're building things peer-to-peer, but as a swarm, we can provide the data availability that you can get out of a data center. As a community, we can do calls to each other, and all we need is the ISP, right? All we need is the connection between our two browsers. We don't need a data center. We don't need a third party in the middle. The chain can help us connect to each other, and then off we go. It's our business what we do. And once people start using that, once developers see the tools actually work, then we're now getting third parties coming in and saying, oh, I could build this, or I could build that. And so one of the reasons we built the games to start off was just to give the developers the tools they need. Like, how do you do randomness without, if you and I wanted to play poker, but also do an auction or do have an NFT trading website, and we need some randomness to make things fair, how do we do it without a middleman? If there's no middleman, who's the arbiter of, right? Now, there are cryptographic ways to do that, but they're not built into the Web 2. So we've built poker basically to make sure we know how to do like a fair card shuffle between three random people who don't know each other on the internet without introducing a trusted third party that eventually leads to Web 2. It leads to someone owning the system and being in control. So that's kind of what we've got. And we've got a set of things, like we say, from gaming through to social communications tools that we've built. And we're really honing those because another part of the equation with Saito is we need people to be using it to make it secure. The consensus mechanism is unique. It's not proof of work or proof of stake. It's secured by transaction volume. So we need people using the network to essentially be to provide security, like having miners come on board. So that's the other reason we've done that, is to bootstrap that process. And then over this year, we're going to look at different ways to incentivize that and ramp up fees. So people are getting rewards so they can pay those fees, but that's then going to provide that secure substrate for them to then operate with all the security, etc. And in running at speed with high transaction volume, Saito is actually provably more secure than other systems, but it does need that base layer of transaction volume to kind of spin up in a way that proof of stake and proof of work kind of ignore by having subsidies to provide security, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know where I saw this, but I just saw it when I was doing some research on you guys, Richard. And this is like a little story. I guess whoever the person was, the developer that created the chat application, and she said, I have nothing to hide, but I don't like Google spying on me. So she created a Saito chat just for herself and a few devices, and then it's just spun out from there, I guess. And that's another way of getting that volume onto the chain, I guess.
Absolutely. And I've realized little things like, I don't have to look too hard because I have the code editor open anyway, but I know that if I encrypt chat between two devices and send something totally secure, like a key to a Bitcoin wallet with a bunch of money in it, to myself on the Saito blockchain, it's completely secure, right? And that's because it's a peer-to-peer transaction. There isn't anyone; it's not sitting on anyone's server in between, other than the connection information being encrypted and on chain. So it's a very different feeling, and it's kind of cool to be able to give people the tools to then expand and build on that and make, I think we'll see a lot of really interesting innovation as these third-party developers pick up steam and start to build on the platform.
So if we zoom out a bit, then Richard, it's pretty interesting time in the crypto markets at the moment. There's, I guess, early signs of what people will hope will be a bull market, and all the attention that brings.
Yeah.
Certainly, new users looking to experiment with different chains. Certainly, new developers
Mhm.
wanting to find new ecosystems to build on. How do you think about what's happening in the market at the moment, and how do you make sure that you guys are kind of positioned to attract users
Mm.
and developers and that volume, I guess.
I mean, there's multiple pieces to sort
Mm.
of answering that question. One is we're here today talking, right? So, and we're here today talking thanks in no small part to the Saito community. And I kind of mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a movement. The community behind Saito is astounding, and they're our biggest, outreach tool that we could possibly have, because they are, proof. And I think when people come into the community, they sense the difference, that there's a real buzz about making a difference in the world, as well as the kind of general crypto feels. Um, so that's a huge part of it. And David and I work very hard on getting the word out by doing things like this. There's also the fact that we've got some things available on the network. We've got what we call Web3 crypto, which is basically support for putting and supporting third-party uh, cryptocurrencies inside Saito apps. So that would be obviously on a game, the ability to stake, to bet each other on wins, or to have a charity tournament. But in social, if people want to do it, it's very easy to do something like ad tipping, or the kind of hive type model, etc. So there's lots of ways we can interface with and show people in various communities that actually, when you have a capacious, like a very high capacity PKI network behind you, other crypto development tasks become a lot simpler and become a lot smoother. So that's another sort of pillar on which we're building the kind of outreach, is the ability to interact and positively enable other projects in the space to have an impact. Um, and then we're also, obviously, we are a crypto project, so we do things like make sure we have, liquidity on markets and those sorts of things. So people who are interested in getting involved have ways to do it. So, we're kind of well prepared. I mean, that's mostly talking to the community there, just reassuring them that we do attend to all these things, because that's really not that's not our prime focus. We're not a, pump some shitcoin, to be frank. So we're not out there trying to get each, little pump to like sit on the shoulders of the last one until we reach some number and flee, right? That's not the game we're playing. So it is more about, every person who comes in and gets involved has a positive impact and pushes us forward. And, we don't throw tokens around, etc., through, play to earn or that sort of thing, which, gets you some credibility. It gets you some, not credibility, it gets you some notoriety for a while, but then eventually it comes home to roost, and you've got huge volumes of tokens being sold onto the market, and you don't have its tokenomics that supports developers in the future actually building businesses on top of the chain. So it is maybe more of a slow and steady message than a lot of places are going to give you. You're not here for your like Lambo pump pump pump. That's not going to happen with us. But you're part of something genuine, and the future is incredibly bright, for people who are early on something like Saito.
Yeah, very well said, Richard. And I think slow and steady is the way to go. And I guess, speaking of slow and steady, in some ways it feels like, the sort of, I guess, gradual evolution from Web 2 to
Mm.
Web 3, it is slow and steady, fits and
Mm.
starts. We had that,
Yeah.
I guess, 2021 wave of, NFTs and
Yeah.
metaverse was really big. But this cycle, for whatever reason, that has kind of slipped into the background,
Yeah.
and for good or bad, meme coins of all things have
Yeah.
kind of taken the
Yeah.
attention, and you can kind of understand. Memes
Yeah.
are easy to understand. Humans love to gamble. It's just
Mm.
sometimes it makes
Yeah.
sense, but it's a little bit. I don't know if it's concerning, but is it
Yeah.
is it worrying? Any disillusionment?
It definitely makes things harder, because even people who totally red pilled on Saito, who've joined the movement, really get at a deep level what we're trying to achieve, I think, are still very conditioned by a market and by an industry where that's a big driving force to expect certain behaviors and to want certain behaviors because it's the done thing. It's very hard in any social sphere to act strongly contrary to what's expected. So it does, it causes all sorts of issues for communicating our goals and our vision to people because they're so used to like essentially a pump pitch. And if that's not what you are, it's hard for people to sift through the layers and understand, oh, there's a genuine message here, etc. So credit to the people in our community who've taken the time and thought through things as well and seen what's going on. So it can make it a lot harder to operate. Obviously, it's a funny thing, obviously the rising tide does float all boats. And it does cause people who may never have gotten around to thinking, oh, I'm interested in a public PKI network to become staunch followers of what we're doing, because through crypto, they bump into Web3, they hear about us, they get involved and they see what's going on and they're swayed, they're part of it, they're red-pilled. But that's, it also makes it hard because in a room full of people shouting, it's very hard to have a conversation. So it's it swings and roundabouts, etc. I think, like you're mentioning NFTs and stuff as well. I think in some ways it's hard to see where meme coins fit in right now, but particularly with things like NFTs, I think NFTs in future will be massive in ways that people aren't necessarily kind of rocking right now. Like I think the idea of on-chain certificates for various things, in the same way that raising capital on chain will be just a thing you do at some point, and half the indexes, the stock exchanges will go away and people will just operate on tokenized assets, etc. That's obviously moving that way. More and more places that's happening. NFTs, people will have things like certifications, proof, particularly with zero knowledge stuff built in there. These are all pieces of puzzles that will come together to build applications that we use every day and we never even think about in the future. But that's really the driver, and it's that thing you're saying, fits and starts, right? You look at our approach to it, it's doing what I said before. People can come and fully Web3, peer-to-peer social, and they didn't even have to do any work, right? Mm-hmm. You need to make it that way. If we said Red Square, you need MetaMask, you need tokens, you need to set up, okay, we might have a bunch of degens doing things very quickly, but we're never going to get mass adoption. I'm not going to tell my parents, hey, come and like message me on Red Square, because they're not going to set up MetaMask to have a conversation. And I think that to me is where the battleground is. And I try and take the positives out of things like a meme coin pump to look for like who it's bringing into the space and what we, how we can make use of that to drive our common objectives forward. And, sometimes you just have to, live with, dog with hat being a $2 trillion entity or whatever it's peaked at.
Indeed. Well said. All right. Well, look, Richard, as we finish up this part of the podcast, just make the case again for, developers or users, why they should come and look at what you guys are doing at Saito and, what's the best place for people to go to? What should they do? Where should they go?
I mean, I think in a way, depending on where you're at as a developer, come along to saito.io/Red Square, or one word. That is a great place just to meet the community. You can ask a question, someone's going to answer it. That's where we gather as a community. So you can always go there to get started. If you want to find out about consensus or developing on the system and how things work, wiki.saito.io is the place to go, and that's got kind of introductory information if you want to sit back and read, etc. Dave and I also do a lot of media, this sort of appearance, podcasts and things where we can. And so if you just Google us, you'll find there's a good lot of stuff out there if you're interested in audio or video input, and that's your way of like getting into something. So that's what I'd say to people first if they want to find out more about the project.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I reckon what we do now then, Richard, is we're going to do a very quick break and then we'll come back. We'll finish off. We'll have some fun. We'll run you through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round. Back in 1 second. All right, we are back, and I'm with Richard Parris. Richard, of course, is the co-founder at Saito. You're very intriguing looking blockchain. Saito.tech, of course, links are in the show notes, listeners. Yep. But Richard, I like to finish each podcast with a quick round of rapid fire crypto conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Absolutely. Let's see how I do.
All right, let's just see how you do, Richard. I'm just going to run some questions at you. Just want your kind of honest answers,
Mm-hmm.
hot take style, if you like. Question one for you. Where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
Oof, I'm way off the end in another dimension. So I love my BTC brothers. I love my BCH and BSV friends as well. And we've left orbit. We're off adventuring in space.
I like it. Very well said. All right. What would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion, Richard?
Routing work is the future for consensus mechanisms that really work.
Oh, nice. Okay. Look, sci-fi author William Gibson famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. With that in mind, Richard, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
We've got a bunch on Saito. I mean, trumpet and blowing my own, but yeah, if you want to see the future of things like social, come and use Saito Talk, video call system. It's everything you get out of video conferencing, but no sign up, no, third parties taking your data. That's the future that you can have, and it's just a few clicks away.
Yep, I was looking at it before. Looks very cool indeed.
Mm.
All right. Yeah, time to finish this off. Really, Richard. Final question for you. What is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Book film. They're so different. The film would have to be Fifth Element. I just love that movie as a movie. It's like a perfect confection.
Yes.
You know, it's not so deep, but it's just perfectly put together. You think book is still probably Brave New World. Had a huge impact on me as a kid.
Yep, Brave New World.
Either that or Philip K. Dick, but yeah,
yeah, Brave New World, great, great dystopian novel, and the original inspiration for Brave New Coin. But
yes,
yeah,
of course.
and yeah, The Fifth Element. I mean, classic film from the '90s, wasn't it? By Luc
Yeah, I
Besson.
mean it's
Yeah.
sort of French cool. Like it's a very different take on sci-fi. It's like imagine sci-fi couture and then we'll put a story behind it.
Yeah.
Like Bruce Willis is just a caricature of Bruce Willis in that movie. He doesn't do anything.
No, and Chris Tucker is off the wall in that film.
He's brilliant in it, and it's just like to me it's a way of it's like dessert of movies, right? It's like there are other dishes, but that one just I could watch multiple times, which is rare for me with a movie.
Love it. All right. Look, hey, this has been a lot of fun. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today, Richard. Just to close it out again, tell people where they can find you on X or wherever else you like to hang out online. And again, where they should go to dig into Saito.
Yep. So again, best thing to do is come say hello on saito.io/Red Square. That's, I hang out there all day. I'm at Richard_Parris on Twitter. And with at Saito Official is the primary Twitter account. But really the action is all on Red Square if you're interested in finding out more about Saito, and you'll find people to talk to and get involved with there anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. All the best, and bye for now.
Thank you.
All right, there you go. There was Richard from Saito. Yeah, very cool. Saito looks good, actually. So, as I say, links in the show notes, but you just go to saito.tech and you can learn all about that. Fifth Element, man, that is a bonkers film. If I'm honest, absolutely bonkers. Yeah, I almost recommend it, but I don't know. It's so bonkers. Anyway, if you know, you know. And that brings us to the end of the show. All right. Thanks, team. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. See ya.